All right, today we are diving into a G20 summit that was, on one hand, totally historic, but on the other, completely overshadowed by a major controversy. We're talking about the summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it's a story that's really about progress and division clashing on the world stage. Let's get right into it. So, you've got this landmark summit pushing for unity, giving a powerful new voice to developing nations. And then, bam, a startling boycott from one of the world's biggest superpowers. The big question we're going to explore today is, what does this clash really tell us about where global cooperation is headed?
Okay, so first let's focus on the positive stuff, because this summit was a really big deal. It was a huge step forward, and for the first time ever, the G20 actually met on African soil. That alone signals a major shift in where the world's attention is going.
Now, why was it so historic? Well, it really comes down to two massive milestones. First, as I said, the first ever G20 on African soil. But the second one, wow, a huge decision was made to admit the African Union as a full, permanent member. You have to understand, that gives an entire continent, 55 nations, a direct seat at the table. That is a complete game changer for who gets a say in the world economy.
And you could tell that new voice was being heard. The final declaration from the summit, it wasn't just the usual diplomatic jargon. It was described as being filled with the spirit of the global South. What that really means is that it was looking at the world's biggest problems, conflict, inequality, all of it, through the eyes of developing nations for a change.
And you can see this focus so clearly in the declaration itself. It didn't just cherry-pick one or two conflicts that are always in the headlines. Nope. It issued this broad, unified call for a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in so many different regions, from Sudan to the Congo to Ukraine. This was a powerful statement that these are all our shared global concerns, not just the priorities of a powerful few.
And building on that momentum, India really stepped up to the plate. They didn't just talk about the problems, they came with actual, concrete solutions that really embodied this new spirit of cooperation. Prime Minister Narendra Modi came forward with 6 major initiatives. And these weren't just vague ideas, you know? They were practical proposals for everyone to work on together, like the G20 Africa Skills Multiplier. That aimed to train 1 million people across the continent. Another one, the Open Satellite Data Partnership, would share vital info for things like farming and disaster relief. It was a real, actionable agenda for development.
So you've got all this positive energy, right? This new sense of inclusion, actual proposals on the table, but there was a gigantic elephant not in the room. A major player was totally and very obviously absent.
And that missing voice? It was the United States. And this wasn't just, a scheduling conflict. This was an official, government-sanctioned boycott that cast a long, dark shadow over the entire event.
And let's be really clear about how big a deal this was. President Trump didn't just decide not to go. The U.S. government formally boycotted. They only sent a low-level diplomat to just watch. This was the first time in the entire history of the G20 that the United States had just walked away. It was a pretty shocking move. So, what was the official reason they gave? Well, it was supposedly due to tensions with the host country, South Africa, over what the U.S. called alleged discrimination against white minority farmers. And that justification, well, it kicked up a storm all on its own.
And this is where things get just incredibly ironic. The United States was boycotting South Africa, the nation that literally endured decades of the most brutal, systematic racial segregation under the Afrikaner-led apartheid regime. And the reason was discrimination. The historical weight of that decision was just staggering.
This whole episode casts a really long shadow, especially when you think about one year in particular, 2026. That's the year the United States is supposed to take over the G20 presidency. And it raises a pretty obvious question, right? How can you lead a forum that you just boycotted? It really puts America's future commitment to the whole thing in serious doubt.
To really get the disconnect here, we need to talk about a key idea that was woven right into the summit's final statement, a concept that is really at the heart of this whole story, Ubuntu.
So, what is Ubuntu? Well, it's this beautiful philosophy from Southern Africa. It's all about our shared humanity. The basic idea is that we are all deeply connected, and my own well-being is completely tied up with the well-being of my community. There's this incredible phrase that just perfectly captures it. I am because we are. It's a call for us to be responsible for each other, to act together. And this very spirit was written directly into the Johannesburg Declaration, trying to set this tone of unity and interdependence. And yet, what was actually happening on the world stage seemed to fly right in the face of that spirit.
It wasn't just that the leader of the world's biggest economy was missing. What was also really noticeable was the silence from most of the other leaders who were there. That core idea of we was being seriously tested. So, after all that, what does this tell us about the future of the G20? Well, the Johannesburg summit kind of laid it all bare, showing both the group's growing strengths and its very real, very deep limitations.
We're left with this dual reality, these two opposing truths. On one side, you have this fantastic, exciting inclusion of the African Union, which points to a more democratic, more representative world. But on the other side, we got a harsh reminder that this whole thing is a fragile coalition, and its entire purpose can be undermined by the actions of just one powerful member.
And that leaves us with one final, really critical question. The G20 put the spirit of I am because we are on paper as the key to solving our biggest problems. But what does it actually mean for global unity when one of the most powerful parts of that we just decides not to even show up? That's a question that is probably going to define the challenges for all of us for years to come.